Hello, I'm Nigel Freeman. I'm the Crown Agent's Director of Studies for the Governance Programme, and I'm very pleased to introduce our guest for this session is Jim Brooks. And Jim, we're going to talk about some of the financial obligations of organisations if they're going to meet their corporate governance responsibilities. But just by way of introduction, could I ask you to just tell us a little bit of your experience in terms of corporate governance?
Well, I was Chief Executive of the local authority Poole in Dorset for 10 years, and then Chief Executive of Kingston-upon-Hull City Council. And before that, City Treasurer of Manchester. I'm an accountant by background. Then I went to the private sector. I worked for a financial advice company on treasury management as an executive director of Capita, and I've run my own company since 2011. I'm currently chairman of the audit committee, audit and risk committee for the National Assembly in Northern Ireland, and I sit on the Parliamentary Commission which supervises the power sharing arrangements as part of that. I've been an external board member for 2 government departments and chairman of the audit committee of both.
Excellent. I'm sure that practical experience and the breadth of experience will be invaluable to our delegates. So, what would you see as the importance and the key roles and responsibilities of the board and the senior management in respect of its fiduciary duties of care?
It tends to start with the financial reports. It tends to start with those 4 core statements of the revenue account and the balance sheet, now called the statement of financial performance and the statement of financial position. But also the other 2 are a statement of cash flow and a statement of assets. Those 4 will only take up about 4 pages, but the average annual report is over 100. And that's because of the notes that put the flesh on the skeleton of those of that information and fulfil the disclosure requirements of international accounting standards. So the board is primarily responsible and accountable in terms of its financial disclosures, its financial recording, but also the way in which the financial control environment operates. The board sets powerful examples by the way it behaves and the way it monitors expenditure during the year, the way it agrees its capital programme of investment, the way it seeks to align the allocation of resources with its strategic objectives.
Yes. So really they're responsible for the financial policies of the organisation and how finance is going to be done in the organisation.
Yes, and once they've done that, they're not only responsible for reporting on it, but responsible for monitoring its performance and assessing its risk. And of course, financial risk is the key risk that face most organisations. How do we meet those unexpected events? How do we match our strengths? And how do we make sure that if the unexpected does happen, we're not knocked off course and failing to achieve our objectives?
Right. And can the board actually delegate some of these responsibilities to the senior management, or do they really remain as ultimately accountable?
There's no question they're ultimately accountable. If it's private sector, of course, and their directors, they're covered by Companies Act legislation. They have to act in the best interests of the company. They can delegate the work, obviously, but they can't delegate that ultimate responsibility.
Good, thank you very much. And is there any real difference these days between the private sector and the public sector in terms of financial responsibilities?
Less and less. When international accounting standards first came out 20 years ago, there was going to be completely different codes for the public sector and the private sector. And there are, I mean, the IFRS and IPSAS, but the difference between the 2 are increasingly small. And it's quite clear that convergence is a real option. I think there are some significant differences that are worth mentioning. For example, in the public sector, an organisation has got to publish its budget and its revenue account, and has no choice about that. In the private sector, of course, that's commercially sensitive and has no place in the real world. I think too the reporting requirements do differ in some respects. The biggest difference is that the public sector raises taxes. And when you raise taxes, you have a different relationship with your customer. It's a distressed purchase, isn't it? Nobody likes paying their taxes. But I think if you think about most of the way things operate, in the public sector, we don't really have directors in the same sense as the private sector. In government departments, we have boards with external independent board members, but they aren't financially accountable in quite the same way. There aren't any shareholders in the public sector. There's a difference in the definition and attitude of customers. So there are different responses. And of course, on the board of a local authority, for example, or an NGO or a government department, the politicians are elected.
Yes, yes. So lots of similarities, but some fundamental differences in that. What kind of assurance or accountability arrangements would you expect to see in an organisation so that it can really demonstrate that it's met those obligations properly?
And some of those are organisational. You would expect to see an internal audit service. You would expect, and it's obligatory, to have your accounts audited by an external auditor, whether it's public or private sector. And you would expect to see an audit committee and arrangements around risk and remuneration dealt with away from the main board. I think too, I would expect to see regular reports on the finances of the organisation presented by the Director of Finance and received actively, demonstrating that the board is actively managing the organisation. And I would also expect to see information related particularly to performance. It is perhaps worth saying something about the AGM and the shareholders' meetings. The traditional pattern of ownership in the UK is that the great majority of shares are held by financial institutions, so pension funds, insurance companies, banks, the like. And so there isn't the level of activity or engagement with shareholders, or shareholders don't exert as much influence as you might expect. But that's changing, and there's no question now that there are challenges happening in shareholders' meetings where shareholders are saying, we don't agree with the level of these bonuses, the financial performance doesn't back it up, or a challenge to the approach the company is taking to marketing or sales. And that's new, or relatively new in the UK, and it's definitely increasing in volume. And I think good to see.
Yes, yes.
There's not yet been a successful challenge to a payroll proposal. So it's early days.
But certainly challenge on financial issues is going up and up and up.
And overdue, I think.
Yeah. Is there any kind of judicial scrutiny as well that boards and senior members ought to think of?
There is. I mean, we've talked about the responsibilities of directors. Worth saying, I think, that non-executive directors carry exactly the same responsibilities as executive operational directors. And I think that's not appreciated as widely as it should be. In the public sector, there is less direct likelihood of surcharge. certainly 20, 40 years ago, the district auditor come and personally surcharge a councillor or a member of parliament, if they, certainly a councillor, if they did something that was illegal and not in the best interests of the ratepayers. But that's been replaced by less arduous regulation, but codes of conduct, codes of practice, and of course an offence of misuse of office, which is again gaining in scrutiny. And there are powers now to commandeer, if you like, the proceeds of crime. So if anyone does commit a crime, they can be pursued and their assets recovered.
Yes, yes. Good, thank you, Jim. So in the process of producing the financial statement, who is actually responsible for approving and signing off those financial statements, and what would you expect to have happened before they reach that sign-off stage?
In the public sector, the accounting officer is responsible for the financial statements, and that's not the director of finance. That's the head of the service, usually the permanent secretary or the chief executive of an NGO. So, but that decision is not taken in isolation. There is consideration at board level, advised by the audit committee. So as chairman of an audit committee, I would get a copy of the draft accounts, I'd talk them through with the external auditor, we'd refer back to any internal audit reports that were relevant. We would use our financial experience to ask questions about whether the balance sheet is getting stronger or weaker, what the revenue performance was, the reasons for any major variations, overspendings or underspendings, to advise the board, to give assurance to the board that the financial accounts properly represent the financial position of the organisation and demonstrate the performance. That enables the accounting officer to sign them off. In the private sector, essentially the accounts are prepared by the Director of Finance, approved by the board and signed off, certified, as in the public sector, by the external auditor. And that's what gives the accounts that credibility in the market. A qualified set of accounts gives the market concerns.
Yes. Good. We're very much hearing now about global standards, so do organisations generally now have to apply the IFRS standards to their financial reports?
They do, and the standards are spreading around the world very rapidly. There's still some patchiness in their application. The major problem or the major issue is around America, and the United States of America has not yet joined IFRS, preferring to retain what they call GAAP, which is generally accepted accounting practice. And their reasoning for that, I think, first of all, is nobody's going to tell them what constitutes good accounting practice, but I think there are a number of tax concessions in the United States that they hold up as being reasons for why compliance with IFRS would cause problems. I think most of those arguments are technical reasons to justify a decision that's already been made, to be honest. Aside from the United States, it's the small band of countries that you might expect not to comply, like North Korea, Yemen, and you know, almost the countries that you'd expect not to be part of the international community. IFRS has spread not just because it gives you access to international markets, it gives you access to grants and a sense of compliance and trust. We are in global markets. If you're going to buy shares, it could be someone in New York or Beijing or Australia or Dubai or any of the financial markets. And so differences associated with language and currency and culture and jurisdiction are much less than they were. Companies like Coca-Cola, Toyota, Microsoft trade all over the world. So they can insist on the way in which accounts are, and they want their accounts to be compliant. And so if you want to borrow money on international markets, if you want to trade with partners, then a set of compliant accounts, IFRS, is a very important aspect of that. In the public sector, it's slower, altogether slower. The move started, Margaret Thatcher introduced resource accounting and budgeting in the early 1990s. And the United Kingdom's not yet produced a set of whole of government accounts that have been approved. So this is quite a long journey. The deadline for compliance was 2016, and there isn't a jurisdiction in the world that's yet compliant. Countries are close. New Zealand in particular, Australia, the United Kingdom, other countries coming up very quickly. They don't have to go through the long drawn-out process that the United Kingdom. If you think about it, if you were on Windows 6, you don't have to go to Windows 7, 8, and 9 to get to Windows 10.
Yes.
And technology is transferable. So international accounting standard in the public sector is spreading more rapidly and will catch up.
Well, would you see the board having a major role to play in financial planning and budgeting?
Yes, a key role. I think that it is the board's duty and role to set the direction of the company, not just its vision, mission and values, but its strategic objectives. And to do that, you need to put the resources behind it. So the board is directly responsible for the approval of the revenue programme, the investment programme, and the targets for profit or surplus or required subsidy, often in the public sector. And not to do that is an abrogation of duty, in my view.
Yes, it's more that strategic focus rather than the short term that we so often see. Yes. And what about board involvement with ensuring proper asset management in organisations?
Well, I think too often that's been neglected. I think the private sector is better at it than the public sector. Some of that is attitudinal. The private sector talk about profit centres, and the public sector talk about cost centres.
Yeah.
We too often in public sector we see assets as being a drain on our resources, something we can't get out of, a fixed cost, something that doesn't contribute. But active management of assets is key. So whether it's public or private sector, you need a management asset plan, you need to know where your assets are, how much they're worth, how you're depreciating them or amortizing them, whether you have any sudden reductions in value that need to be taken account of. And in many jurisdictions, particularly for public sector international accounting standards, the collation of asset information and its valuation will be the biggest single task.
Do you think that some organisations underestimate the importance of assets because they don't have a financial measurement put to them? I'm thinking of things like information and knowledge and some of these more intangibles.
Yeah, we don't value our own information and we don't secure it enough. Too many examples of carelessness with personal information, too many examples of very sensitive information falling into the wrong hands, particularly in the public sector. Private sector seems either to be able to manage that better or to not to admit to it and get away with it.
Yeah.
I think information is worth money. If you look at any government balance sheet or statement of financial position in the UK, you will see intangible assets. And that's, generally speaking, writing off the cost of developing new information systems. What we've not yet moved to is understanding the value of the information that we hold and the uses to which it can be put. There's a new European directive on data protection, and both public and private sector organisations need to be fully understanding of the information they hold, the purposes they hold it for, and the uses to which it can be put.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just turning now on to the other big important part of governance, which is about managing risks. What are the strategic financial risks that you would expect to see on most organisations' risk profile?
On the boards that I've been, certainly in the public sector, the number one risk has been losing control of the revenue budget. Yeah, no question of that. And the penalties now for a major overspending are quite severe. And if you talk to Treasury people, they say that it could be the end of the career of a permanent secretary. I think too we forget just how damaging an underspending can be, because there's evidence of lack of financial management, lack of capacity to deliver, lost opportunity to give services to people. And there are some, again, in our near past, there are some big examples of, for example, in Work and Pensions Department, Ian Duncan Smith in 2012 wanted about 50 million, I understand, to do some piloting of trying to reduce the cost of benefits, and was refused, saying there was no money in the budget. There was a subsequent underspending that year of £5 billion.
Yes, yes.
And a fallout then between the Permanent Secretary and the Minister, which had ramifications across Whitehall.
Yes. I think so often people don't see the risks of not doing something.
Exactly.
It's
not just revenue too. If you underperform on capital, then you're underinvesting. In a way, Britain faces a serious problem of having old infrastructure. It's railways, it's pipework, it's electricals, it's telephony. All of those systems are old. I mean, the main underground system in London was completed by 1900 pretty well. And although it's expanded brilliantly to keep pace with the size of the city, we are still dealing with very old infrastructure that's lasted very well but is wearing out.
Yeah. So would you expect the board to be getting regular information about these strategic risks, and would that be coming directly to them or via some other board committee?
Lots of boards have set up audit and risk committees. I think you need a hierarchy of risk in organisations. It's not good enough just to put the top half dozen risks to the board. You need risk registers in every major area of the business or the organisation, and from those you need to collate a corporate body of risks of the ones that you need to be able to address, the ones which, if they did go wrong, would threaten the continuance of the organisation, the ones that would put you into crisis. And those need to be presented to the board on a regular basis. They need to be assessed in terms of their likelihood and impact. They need to be thought about in terms of the risk appetite of the organisation. If something goes wrong, or they need to be refreshed, there should be new risks. There should be some of those risks should be falling off the register. And always good, I think, to consult your external auditor on the risk profile you've got. There's something on these key risks, because it's not just about managing the revenue budget, it's about foreseeing where the risk is going to come. What would happen if you lost 10% of your revenues? What would happen if your expenditure was forced upwards by a sudden increase in costs? And the board need to be alert to that and actually demanding information, not just settling for the standard reports. And I think that's where the key role of the non-executive director comes in. That's where someone bringing experience from outside can challenge this information without necessarily making it a professional challenge as it would be between operational directors.
So really the board's role includes a big challenge and oversight role in there. So would you say it's critical to have somebody on the board who is financially qualified?
Yes, I do. And certainly it's pretty well a requirement in the private. I've never seen a private sector board that doesn't have its director of finance on the board. In the public sector, it varies. And I've been a chief executive for 12 years altogether, and I've not had my a director of finance on my senior management team, but I've had cover for it. I prefer to have the head of profession head of service unit below that level, and have the management team as being very strategic. But I would expect the decision-making bodies in the public sector, the councillors or the MPs, to be advised by professional financial people with those qualifications.
Yes. I mean, it's not essential that they're all financially competent, but
in local government, for example, it's a statutory requirement that one of the chief officers has specific responsibility for finance, is suitably qualified, and is actually endorsed or recognised by the Secretary of State. And that position then, that statutory role has specific responsibilities to taxpayers, to a fiduciary duty, a personal financial fiduciary duty to taxpayers, and also has a statutory duty to point out to the organisation if it may be overspending to the point of illegality, a requirement to set a legal budget, and if not, then the Director of Finance can take direct action, irrespective of the Chief Executive and irrespective of elected politicians, to require the organisation to stop spending money until it comes within the legal framework. So quite powerful.
Quite indeed. So, can you see some dangers of having one overpowerful person?
Well, I have to say, in my 30 odd years of experience in local government, I've never actually seen a director of finance exercise those powers, because I think it would show a lack of consultation, a lack of teamwork, and it would probably be the last act of that director.
Yes.
But it's a safeguard, it's a fail-safe, and it's a threat. That can that holds its sway not just over the chief executive and other officers, but over elected politicians as well, who may be in election year may be very reluctant to increase the level of taxes.
Yes. So, from what you've been telling us, the financial responsibilities of a board and the senior executives is absolutely critical to the good governance of an organisation, and becoming ever increasingly complex but even more important.
And I think they have a collective responsibility to achieve their financial targets. It's just not fair to expect the Director of Finance to shoulder all of that. All of them sitting around that table, all of the executive directors are budget holders and have direct responsibility for spending and income generation.
So the hope is that they act corporately.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah. So in that challenging environment then, Jim, if you had 3 wishes to improve the financial governance of organisations, what would they be?
I think I'd start with an improvement in risk and performance management. I think that too many boards don't get into the nitty-gritty, don't fully understand the risks that the organisation faces and the performance requirements that they should be demanding. They're tolerant, I think, of failures to achieve objectives, or they accept a series of objectives that are not really objectives, to continue to develop something. So something that's not specific enough. I think that objectives should have milestones that are specific and achievable. I think the second thing I would look for is to strengthen the role of the non-executive directors. I think that we've talked about the need for them to bring their experience to bear on the board, but I think too often their voices go not unheard but unrecognised. And I think a powerful chairman and powerful operational directors make it quite difficult for independent board members, particularly if they're small in number. And I had a spell on the board where I was the only independent board member and found that very challenging indeed. And I think the third one would be a wish for better training. It would be that boards recognise the need to invest in their own skills. So they should take courses like finance for non-financial managers. They should take courses on better governance, better board effectiveness, and actually take the opportunity to work together on projects where it's not just the monthly board meeting and then a lunch, but something that's where they take themselves away and consider problems and work together to produce it. There's no doubt that the research is pretty clear that cohesive boards work better than non-cohesive boards, and also that boards that have got strong teamwork do better than boards that have got star performers and fellow travellers.
Yes. Well, let's hope that those wishes come true.
Thank you.
And, Jim, thank you ever so much for those wonderful insights. I'm sure that will alarm, if not excite, a lot of board members around the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.